Welcome to Boards, Beer, and BS, the Snowme.com podcast where snowboard pros, coaches, and local riders hang out, have a drink, and talk snowboarding. My name is Jedediah Tan, snowboard coach and founder of Snowme.com. If you like hanging out with other snowboarders and talking about snowboarding, this is the podcast for you. So sit back and enjoy the podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to Boards, Beer and BS episode 10, I believe this is. So this episode we're going to be covering the topic of how to get fast freestyle progression and injury-free snowboarding. So if you're interested in advancing your freestyle, learning new snowboard tricks, and just generally progressing as fast as possible and staying healthy while you do it so that you don't have to spend days in a wheelchair, on crutches, or whatever it is so that you don't get injured, then this is the episode for you to listen to. So here are some topics that we're going to cover this episode. We're going to talk about why, for one, there's no such thing as injury-free snowboarding and what that means basically, and why anyone that ever tells you that they can teach you injury-free snowboarding is lying to you. Then we're going to cover why there's such a thing as good and bad injuries and what the difference is between them. Then we're going to cover why injuries are really the key to fast freestyle progression and the difference between beginners and experts getting injured. So as well as that, the main thing we're going to be covering as well is that we're going to dive into the topic of what do top pros and experts do differently from the average snowboarder to get those good injuries, to get that fast freestyle progression. And as well as that, the last thing I'm probably going to cover in this episode is the 4 questions you can ask yourself so that you know when you're taking a good risk, when you're making the smart choice with your freestyle progression, how to know when this is something you should be going for. So if you ever find yourself standing at the top of a hill wondering if you should be going for this trick or not, if it's a good move, it's a smart thing, if a pro would do it in your situation, then these are the 4 questions you need to ask yourself and what answers you need to be getting before you make that decision to drop in, to do that 360, to do that backflip, to do that 50-50, whatever that trick is. You need to ask yourself these 4 questions and get 4 yeses. All right, so let's get into the episode. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by the Snowme.com Snowboard Trick Secrets program. So if you're interested in advancing your freestyle snowboarding, learning how to do jumps, how to hit rails, how to do flat ground tricks, this is our step-by-step video tutorial trick tip program that I guarantee is the most detailed trick tip program you will find anywhere on the planet. So you may be used to seeing 2-minute, 3-minute tutorials on YouTube on how to do a 360 or whatever the trick is. This is not our program. Our program is detailed step-by-step tutorials. So I think our 180 tutorial alone is about 30 minutes broken down into a few videos where I teach you about carving, I teach you about spinning, I teach you about body positioning, how to do every step of a 180. So this is just an example of what's inside our program. So if you're interested in getting started with freestyle snowboarding, then check out our free Snowboard Trick Secrets program at snomie.com/snowboard trick secrets. So that's where you can check out our free step-by-step Snowboard Trick Secrets program. All right, so let's get into the podcast. And as always, if you guys need any show notes for this podcast, all my show notes are at snomie.com. So that's snomie.com/episode 10. So that's where you can get all the links, the summary, the breakdown for anything I talk about in this podcast. All right, so now let's get into the topics. Okay, so firstly, here's the deal with injury-free snowboarding. There's no such thing. Okay, so you'll notice that in the title of this podcast, in the title of this blog, when I say injury-free snowboarding, the injury-free is in quotes because there's really no such thing as completely injury-free snowboarding. And if you ever find someone that's going to tell you that, hey, I can teach you how to snowboard injury-free guaranteed, then they're lying to you. Because snowboarding just isn't a sport where you can be 100% injury-free. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get really severe injuries all the time and there's nothing you can do about it or anything like that. But with snowboarding, you will get injuries from time to time. And it's more about knowing how to get the good injuries instead of the bad injuries and knowing how to avoid the injuries that you don't need to get. Now, accidents will always happen, but with the smart plan, with the right steps in place, you don't need to get injured when you don't have to be injured, right? So That's what injury-free snowboarding is all about. Now, I remember back when SnowMe was first getting popular, I think it was the first time when we started to hit 20, 30,000 unique visitors a month on our website. We started getting ad requests, people who wanted to buy ads on our blog. And one of them was some scammy website that was something about injury-free snowboarding. And it's the most ridiculous concept ever. It's the only people that will sell you on injury-free snowboarding are people who don't know what you're talking about. So really, if you see anyone say injury-free snowboarding and actually think they can teach you how to snowboard and how to do everything and give you a guarantee of never getting injured, that's a complete lie. But we are here to minimize the injuries, how to snowboard smart. So it all comes down to this concept of good versus bad injuries. So with good injuries, they're things like, say, a wrist sprain. Okay, so that's obviously getting injured isn't good, but a wrist sprain versus dislocating your shoulder and needing shoulder reconstruction, right? So that's a bad injury. So in that context, that's a good injury. Just getting a small minor wrist sprain, they'll heal up in a week or 2 weeks, then you're good to go. But if you have something major like a dislocated knee, dislocated shoulder, torn ligaments, that's the kind of thing that will bite you for a long time and you may never fully recover from it. So that's what I mean by the concept of good versus bad injuries. You want to limit yourself to getting the good injuries where you can recover, where it's not a permanent thing, where you're not out for 6 months, a year even. So when I did my ACL, I was out for a year. And then the follow-up surgeries took me out for months at a time. So that's what you want to avoid. You don't want the bad injuries. And in this podcast, obviously, I'm going to tell you about how to avoid the bad injuries and how to aim for just the good injuries. So here's the thing with injuries that a lot of people don't realize. And the thing about it is that injuries are one of the keys to fast freestyle progression. So if you're interested in learning tricks as fast as possible, then getting injured or getting smart injuries are your key to getting that progression. Because if you're pushing yourself, you're learning new tricks, you're never not going to get injured. You're never not going to fall. So if you're snowboarding and you're not falling once in a while, then you're doing something wrong, because that means you're just not learning anything new. I mean, even the best pros fall. So if you're not pushing yourself, you're not getting injured, then you know that you're kind of stagnating. You're not getting any progress in your snowboarding. But why I say injuries are the key to fast progression is that with injuries, the smart, how do I put this? Okay, with injuries, the smart snowboarders will get the good injuries. So if they get injured, they may be out for a couple of days. They might rest a weekend. They might be out for a week or whatever it is. But with the guys who don't know how to manage the injuries, who don't know how to take the smart injuries, and they just progress and they just huck themselves off jumps without knowing what they're doing, and they end up with ACL reconstructions, shoulder reconstructions, whatever it may be, those serious injuries, that's what's really going to hamper your progress. So if you take one guy who's, he's doing the smart thing, he's still getting some minor injuries over the course of a season, he might miss maybe 20 days out of 100 days on the hill from minor injuries. But you take the guy who's kind of started like crazy, and he just, everyone has a friend that kind of just goes crazy in the park and doesn't have any safety margin. Those are the kind of guys who, they'll get really fast progression. Then one day you'll be like, hey man, where are you? And they'll tell you, oh, I kind of need surgery because I ruined my body, And those are the kind of guys who they'll be out for 6 months because they really, really mess something up. They'll need surgery. They'll need all sorts of issues fixed with their body. So that's why injuries are the key, really. They're one of the big, big, big keys when it comes to fast freestyle progression. Do you want to be out for 6 months, or do you want to be out for just a couple of days? And that's the difference. And if you don't know how to manage your riding and avoid the bad injuries and only get the good injuries, then you're in for a wild ride of constant just, I guess, sitting at home and watching your friends go snowboarding while you're stuck at home just nursing whatever injury that you have. So yeah, it's not about how fast you progress all the time. It's about how fast you progress while remaining uninjured or as healthy as possible. If you talk to any of the top pros, what limits them isn't the fact that they don't know how to do the trick. It's usually limited to how can they do or learn this trick without getting injured, or what injuries do they have that are stopping them from trying this trick. So it's all about injury management. And as you get better as a snowboarder, you'll find this comes into play more and more. It's about managing those injuries. So that's why, I mean, this is such an important topic, and I really hope more people listen to this, but it's a major topic. And I want to ask you guys this question. What do top pros and experts do differently from the average snowboarder to get good injuries? Now, that's the question you should be asking yourself, and that's the question I'm going to try to tell you the answer to in this podcast. What do top pros and experts do differently from the average snowboarder that means they get these good injuries? And I guess the first thing before I answer that is I'll tell you about beginner versus expert injuries. So what I mean by this is that when you're a beginner, you're going to get all sorts of random little injuries. You're going to sprain your wrist. There'll be a lot of bumps and bruises. And when you're a beginner, I find that's when you get a lot of injuries, because you're still learning a lot of the basics. You're going to be falling a lot. You're still learning how to fall properly. There's so many things that are getting thrown at you as a beginner that, those injuries they're inevitable. They're going to happen. But once you get past that stage, you'll find that you don't really fall as much, or rather you don't fall in times when you're not expecting that a fall might happen, I guess is how you could put it. So if I take a pro snowboarder, I put them on a green, a blue run, and they're just doing basic 180s, 360s, whatever a simple trick is for them, you won't see them fall that much, if any. They'll just be cruising around. They won't fall unless that you take them maybe to like a 70-foot jump and ask them to try this new trick that they haven't tried. That's when they might fall. But it's a lot more controlled. And one big goal I have with any of my snowboard trick tip tutorials, anything I do with Snowy, is trying to get people through that beginner period. Because what I find is that in that beginner period, when you're falling a lot, when most injuries happen, that's when you get those, if you're unlucky, that's when you get those major injuries, when you might get that ACL torn, when you might get that shoulder reconstruction needed. And that's when those types of injuries can happen, and then that just impacts you through the rest of your snowboard life. So but if you can get through that beginner period, then you become an expert. And then as an expert, the kind of injuries you get tend to be more, I guess, controlled. They tend to be injuries that you're putting yourself there for, and you don't get the small minor injuries as much. You tend to get, if you get injured, you don't get, oh man, how do I put this without making it confusing? Okay, so as a beginner, you get injured a lot, but they tend to be minor injuries most of the time, unless you get unlucky. As an expert, you tend to get injured very, I guess, seldomly, very infrequently. But when you do get injured, it tends to be a little bit more major because you can avoid a lot of those minor things, right? So I guess what I'm trying to do, as I said, is trying to get most of you guys through that beginner intermediate stage when you're getting those injuries, so that once you reach that expert stage, then you know what you're in for. And any injuries you get are situations that you put yourself into and you were prepared for it. And then it just comes down to rolling the dice and being smart about your snowboarding. So now, to answer the question I asked you guys earlier, what do top pros and experts do differently from the average snowboarder to get good injuries? The answer is that it all comes down to managing risk and knowing exactly when to take a risk and when to opt out. So if you see any pro snowboarder and you ask them what goes through their head when they're thinking about doing a new trick, and a lot of it, 99% of it, is just risk management. They're just doing the details in their head, thinking, okay, what risk am I taking here? What is the chance that I might get injured? They basically calculate everything, and they know, okay, is this something I should do? Should I opt out here? Should I progress a little bit more in another area and come back to this? And that's what all the top pros do, because snowboarding isn't about getting super fast progression all the time. It's about the long-term game. Whether you be snowboarding when you're 30 or you're 35, how long you can keep progressing without the injuries all stacking up. So one big thing you notice with a lot of veteran snowboarders is they have a lot of injuries, and those injuries stack up over the years where they've got ACL problems, they've got shoulder problems, they've got back problems. There's so many things that affect you once you become a veteran snowboarder because of all those little injuries that happen along the way when you made silly mistakes or you had a bit of bad luck, whatever it is. So it's just about minimizing those, really. And yeah, I mean, I really hope people learn from this podcast and what I'm about to go through. Okay, so what is the perfect balance of risk and injury to get the fastest snowboard progression? So this is what you guys want to know, right? Well, it comes down to three types of snowboarders. In my experience, there's three types of snowboarders, or you'll see three types of snowboarders on the hill. The first is the guy that takes no risk and gets really, really slow progress. So they're the guys that basically, they may be on the green run for forever, maybe even. They're the guys that progress really, really, really slow, but they take basically zero risk. Okay? That's the first type. The second type is the guys that take medium risk. So they take some risk and they get some progress. They kind of the middle ground. They don't take stupid risks all the time. They don't hide behind on the green runs all the time. They take some risk and they get some progress. Then there's the third type of person, the high risk, high progress snowboarder. So they're the guys that you see in the park hacking themselves off 50-foot jumps when they just learned to hit their first jump. They're the guys that will throw themselves off giant kickers. They'll throw themselves onto rails. They don't seem to have that margin of safety when they ride. But in exchange for that, they'll fall a lot, but they also tend to get really fast progression. But the question I want to ask you is, out of these three people, which snowboarder do you think progresses the fastest? And here's the thing, is that it's not the high risk, high progress guy. Because in my experience, all of them burn out and they all get injured at some point. Well, maybe they'll make it a season, maybe they'll make it 2 seasons without that major injury. But eventually, if they keep riding at that high risk, high progress level, they get injured, and then next thing you know, they're out for a whole season. So what tends to happen is that, well, firstly, let's forget the first category of people who take no risk and get no progress, right? Obviously, in snowboarding, you always got to take risk to get some progress. So if we cut those guys out, it's between the medium risk and the high risk guy. So what happens is the high risk guy burns out, so they're out for 6 months or whatever it is. So they may progress really fast at the start, but then they're done, because then they just all the injuries start piling up. But the medium risk snowboarder is kind of like that old story of the turtle and the hare, where the turtle's just taking it step by step. And eventually, the medium risk snowboarder ends up outpacing and progressing faster because they did the right things. They took the smart moves. They didn't take the stupid risks that ended up destroying their body and getting 50 billion injuries piling up. And believe me, you go to any ski resort, you look at all the pros, 99% of them have a laundry list of injuries that they've all gone through. And any pro snowboarder I talk to will really, really stress the importance of injury management and taking the smart risks. There's not a top snowboarder that I've ever talked to that doesn't understand this concept. So the thing I want to stress here is that, yeah, you want to be the medium risk, average progress guy. But if you do it smart, you can actually end up getting very fast progress while taking medium risk. And I'm going to tell you how to do that right now. So the thing I've noticed, though, is that the average snowboarder goes through all three phases. I've never met someone that's always been one. Well, actually, that's a lie. I've met a lot of people that are the high risk, high progress type of snowboarders until they burn out. But on a whole, most snowboarders I find, they kind of bounce around between these three types. Sometimes they'll be the no risk guy, sometimes they'll be the medium risk guy, sometimes they'll be the high risk guy. But what I found is it tends to go with how new they are to the game. So usually when they first start out, they'll start out either in the no risk or the high risk. So as a beginner, that's where most people tend to lie. They don't want to take too much risk, or they'll just be game for everything, even the stupid risks. But over time, everyone tends to go towards the medium risk path. As they get more experience, as they become veteran snowboarders, that's where they tend to go. So I mean, if every single veteran snowboarder is going down towards that medium risk path eventually, there's a reason for it. It's because that's the best way to progress. So the best and smartest pros know how to find that perfect balance and ride that level of risk to get fast progression with minimal bad injuries. And that's really what separates veteran pros from the average park hucker. You know, the guy that just hucks tricks off massive jumps and has no idea what they're doing. And for some of you guys who may have been listening to Snow Me for a long time, I think back a few years ago, I did a podcast with Benji Farrow. He's on the US national team for snowboarding. So we talked about double corks because that was a period where everyone was kind of learning those double corks. And one thing he mentioned was that it's not about just hucking yourself. You know, even for a guy like him who needs super fast progress, we talked about how even the pros, even those guys, the up and comings, the ones that have so much pressure to perform and learn those double cork tricks, they do it with a degree of calculation. They make sure they know what they're doing and they take that smart risk. So that's what separates those guys like Benji Farrow from the average park hucking kid who's hucking ugly 720s and is on his way to an early shoulder reconstruction, whatever it is. Okay, so now finally, what is the perfect amount of risk then? And how can you tell when you're ready to try a trick without turning it into a stupid risk? And for most people, they don't know the answer to this, but there's 4 simple questions that I usually ask, or I ask myself, or any of my students if they are doing some new trick or they're trying a new technique. And if you can answer yes to these 4 questions, then that's usually when I say, okay, you're ready to try this trick. So 1 is, can I smoothly do all the little tricks that make up this trick? So with any trick, there's always other little techniques that make up that trick, or all the little tricks that you need to do before you learn this trick. So for example, with 540s, you learn 180s, you learn straight airs, you learn 360s, and then after you learn all the little things that lead up to it, then you learn the 540. And it's really common. People that get injured a lot, you find that those guys are the kind of guys that, you know, they learn how to hit their first jump, learn how to do a 180, and then they just kind of huck their body and keep hucking until they get that 360 or 540. But it's this ugly, uncontrolled kind of learning where they get injured really, really easily because they don't really know what they're doing. So your first question that you want to answer yes to is, can I smoothly do all the little tricks that make up this trick? Now 2 is, am I one step outside of my comfort zone? So that's just something I always ask. If you want to progress, then you always have to take a step outside your comfort zone when you want to progress. Now, I'm not saying you always have to be uncomfortable in snowboarding. Everyone has those days when they're on the hill, they're just relaxing, they're just taking some cruisy runs. That's fine. But when you want to progress, you should be one step outside your comfort zone. Now, I don't mean if you just learn how to hit jumps, then go hit that 70-foot jump, right? No, that's maybe 100 steps outside your comfort zone. What I mean by one step outside your comfort zone is if you're learning to hit boxes and you just hit that smooth 50-50, okay? So now you might start thinking, okay, let's start working on board slides. That's one step up, right? It's not a crazy leap where you're just going balls to the wall and you have no idea what you're doing, but you're just going to huck it and hope for the best. No, it's one step outside your comfort zone. So you want to be a little bit uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable where it's just you have no idea what's going on, right? Now, the third question is, do I know exactly how to do each step of this trick? So that's a big one. I find so many people, so they learned the 180, they learned the 360, then they go to the 540, and they just huck it, right? And that's not how you learn a trick. And when you want to learn a trick, you want to know, okay, how do I turn this 360 into this 540? Or if it's a frontside board slide, you want to learn, okay, how do I execute this extra step? How do I add to what I know to do this trick? So you never ever want to do a trick if you don't know exactly how to do each step. And for my VIP members, the guys listening to this who are part of my Snowboard Trick Secrets VIP program, you know that in any tutorial I teach you guys, I always break it down for a reason. You know, there's a reason I hate those 2-3 minute YouTube tutorials for tricks, because they just suck. And when you want to learn a trick, you got to learn every little step. So for example, to take another example from my VIP program, is if I teach someone how to do a 180, I don't say, okay, you hit this jump, you do this, that's a 180. No, I teach them how to do straight as. Then I teach them, this is how you do carving. This is how you do body rotation. This is where you look. This is how you control the spin. And I teach them all the different steps. This is how you pop off the jump. This is how you leave the lip where you should be turning. So there's so many little steps to make up the trick. And if you don't know how to do those steps, then you need to find someone that does and find out how to do it before you attempt that trick. So that's the third question you want to ask yourself. Now the fourth is, can I land safely if I screw this up? What this means is, if you ask any top pro snowboarder, you ask any good veteran snowboarder who's trying to learn a new trick, you find that they don't try new tricks unless they know they can land safely if they screw up. So for a lot of veteran snowboarders, that may mean, can I land on my feet? You know, if I'm trying this trick, am I going to end up upside down, no idea where I am, and then just, you know, break your neck? But that's obviously not what anyone wants to do. So can you land safely if you screw it up? Can you land on your feet? Do you know how to fall properly? Do you know how to bail out if it doesn't work out? And for any trick, if you can't say, yes, I know how to land safely, if I don't make this rotation, I know how to fall, then don't do it. You know, it's just a stupid risk. And I guess those are the 4 questions. So again, I'll repeat them. 4 questions. 1, can you smoothly do all the little tricks that make up this big trick? So for 540s, can you do a 180? Can you do a 360? Can you do the carving? Can you do all the little steps? Number 2, are you outside your comfort zone? Are you one step outside your comfort zone? So a little bit uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that it's a crazy leap of faith. 3, do you know exactly how to do each step of this trick? So not just the little tricks that make up the trick, but do you know how to do all the new steps that you need to add? And 4, can you land safely if you screw it up? So those are the 4 questions you need to ask. And you see, a lot of my VIP students will see that this is why I literally have an entire module inside my program called How to Break Down Any Trick and Learn Any Trick. Because I think it's such an important skill to be able to break down any trick and know, okay, what do I need to learn? I need to learn this, this, and this. And if you don't know how to do that, then you're going to run into so many problems. And that's really what makes a good snowboarder, is that they can break down what they're doing wrong, where they can improve. And yeah, I guess that's a skill that I really try to impart to a lot of people. And I guess the last thing I'll leave you guys with for this podcast is that good snowboarders take smart risks. Okay, they don't ignore risks, they don't avoid risks, but good snowboarders are risk takers. You know, no one progresses and learns any new tricks without taking some risks. But it's all about taking the smart risks. It's all about knowing which risks to take, which risks not to take. So that's why I always go back to those 4 questions. And by the way, you don't have to write those 4 questions down. I'll put it in the show notes. So if you want the show notes for this episode, I'll write the 4 questions down for you guys. You can go to snomie.com/episode 10. And these 4 questions will be in the show notes for you. So I guess that's basically what I want to say for this podcast. It's how to stay injury-free as best as you can and get that fast progression that most people want. Remember, it's not a race. It's, can you walk when you're 30, 40? You know, do you want to wreck yourself by the time you're 25? Or do you want to be able to keep spinning, keep riding park, keep learning new tricks when you're 35, 40, 50? So yeah, take the smart risks. You know, always take the smart risks. It's not about a racing game to see who can land at triple cork first. You're not Shaun White or whatever it may be. You want to take the smart risks. You want to stay injury free, and you don't want to have back problems when you're old or whatever it may be. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something from this podcast. And as always, thanks so much for listening. You know, if you guys enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe. We're on iTunes. That's probably the easiest way to listen to this podcast. If you type in Snomie or Boards, Beer, and BS, you'll find us on iTunes. Or, you know what? In the show notes, there'll be links to subscribe in the show notes at snomie.com/episode 10. And once again, this podcast was brought to you by the Snomi.com Snowboard Trick Secrets program. So it's basically the most detailed snowboard trick tips you'll find anywhere on the planet. And you get one-on-one coaching with me if you're a VIP in that program. So that's huge. I don't know anyone else that actually gives the time to go one-on-one with their students and do video analysis and tell them what they're doing wrong. And yeah, it's just a great program. So if you're interested in getting 4 free tutorials from this program and checking it out, go to snomie.com/snowboardtricksecrets. All right, so take care, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.